Yo, listen up! I'm Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon and The Blackest Heart and The Lonesome Crown, all published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today, normally I've got some notes behind the camera of talking points that I want to say in all my book reviews so I don't forget stuff. I abandoned all that for this book review. I don't have any notes. This is just going to be all out of the top of my head, just on the fly here. Because I'm telling you something, I read these books probably 100 times each when I was a kid. I don't need no notes to talk about this stuff. Dragonlance, The Dragons of Autumn, Twilight. I'm going to review one of my favorite books from when I was a kid, The Dragons of Autumn Twilight, and I will eventually review The Dragons of Winter Night, The Dragons of Spring Dawning, and the Twins Trilogy 2. I'm going to review them all one at a time, individually. I got to tell you something, man. When I was a kid, it was all about Dragonlance. These books came out, I remember walking into the bookstore. I grew up in Sevier County, Utah, people. Sevier County, Utah. It sounds... It looks about like it sounds. Sevier County. It's in the middle of the desert. It's a small town. Nothing going on. No bookstores, no movie theaters, no restaurants, no nothing. It's like a small desert, barren wasteland of a place. That's where I grew up. And I remember it was a treat for me to go to the big city, Salt Lake City, and go to the bookstores and pick out books every once in a while. And I remember the very day that I went to Salt Lake City and I saw this book with that Larry Elmore cover. And there's a version of it right there. Larry Elmore cover. Oh, gosh. You know what I'm talking about. There was no better artist in the 80s, no better cover artist in the 80s than Larry Elmore. And that cover, it was like I was walking through the bookstore and it was like the lights from heaven shone down on the book cover and the choirs and angels sang, "Here's the book that you've been waiting for your whole young life." And it's not hyperbole. That's exactly the way it happened. And I took this shining gem of a book off the bookshelf and I took it home. Dragonlance, not knowing anything about it. I knew what Dungeons and Dragons was. I knew a little bit about that. But I started reading this book and it immediately became my favorite fantasy book. And by that time I had read, Shannara. I had read Raymond Feist, David Eddings, Thieves' World, Lloyd Alexander. I had read J.R.R. Tolkien. I had read all the Conan books. I had read so much fantasy. And this somehow became my favorite overnight. And I read it and reread it and reread it and reread it and reread it. And then this came out eventually. And I reread and reread it. I would read these things every month. I just thought they were fantastic. And I loved the Larry Elmore covers, and I would just draw. I was an artist, a little high school artist, and I would just slavishly copy everything that Larry Elmore had done. And I mean, look at these things. Now, one of the treats, I've got this. Here's Tanis and Lorana, this print that Larry signed for me. As an older guy, when I got into the business, I'm a writer myself. This is me. Speaking of Larry Elmore, this is me and Larry Elmore. I took him on a tour. He came out to one of the Comic-Cons here in Salt Lake City. He had nothing better to do after the Comic-Con, so I took him on a tour of all the national parks in Utah. So I got to... Who would have thought a kid from Sevier County, Utah, who dreamed of being a fantasy writer one day, who worshipped the art of Larry Elmore because of Dragonlance, would have gotten an opportunity to take that very artist on a tour of southern Utah. It happened. That's what happens in life if you work hard and pursue your dreams. You get to meet your heroes and you get to call them friends. And I still am in contact with Larry all the time. I saw him at Dragon Con not long ago. We hung out. We had a laugh. It was great. We haven't talked anything about the book yet. But that's all right. That's all right. As a kid, let's just say I loved it. Every character. Oh my gosh. These books, if you haven't read them yet, they are simple little Dungeons and Dragons adventures. written for a grade level of like a junior high, high school level grade. I mean, they're PG, they're not R. You know, they're not written like Tolstoy or War and Peace or anything. I mean, they're written fairly simply, you know, Harry Potter type level writing style. We're not talking about rocket science or brain surgery here. These are not the type of books that your high school or college English professor is going to give you to read and study the inner themes of the human soul. Not at all. These are much better than that. These are just, quite frankly, way more awesome than that. Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss. By the way, these are all signed by Tracy Hickman and Larry Elmore. All of them signed. I have not met Margaret Weiss yet. It might be Margaret Weiss, I don't know. Not met her, but Tracy Hickman and Larry Elmore have signed all my books. And, gosh, where was I? Oh, yes, the story. It's like a very simple sort of Dungeons and Dragons dungeon crawl. It's like lit RPG before that was even a thing. You know, with all your characters that you set up to go on your Dungeons and Dragons adventure with. You got your elf, your half-elf, your fighter, your paladin, your knight, your halfling, your dwarf, your dark elf, your magic user. I mean, you got all of them on your group, right? You got all of them going out on your adventure. And, you know, their names are Tanis, Caramon, Raceland, Sturm, Tasselhoff, Flint Fireforge, Riverwind, Goldmoon, and then Kitiara, who doesn't show up for the adventure, which is part of the plot twist. Because Kitiara is one of their normal adventurers, and she don't show up for the adventure. But we find out later in the book, and in the subsequent books, why. Like, I don't give spoilers, you know. I mean, God, if you haven't read Dragonlance by now, I don't know what to tell you. Every kid should read Dragonlance. Every kid should read Dragonlance before they're forced to read Catcher in the Rye or any other sort of pretentious bullshit like that. I'm telling you that right now. You get kids reading Dragonlance and they'll read the rest of their life. You make them read shit like, you know, God, what did I have to read? Tale of Two Cities? I don't mind Tale of Two Cities now as an adult, but man, you don't want to give that to a 13-year-old kid. You want to give them Dragons of Autumn Twilight. That's what you want to give them. You can discuss the themes of that. You can discuss the themes of friendship and camaraderie and bravery and doing the right thing that Dragons of Autumn Twilight talks about, which these pretentious, crappy books that kids are forced to read don't talk about any of that stuff. They just talk about, God, you read those books, you want to commit suicide. They don't give you any life advice worth shit. Dragonlance does. It does. It does. The adventures, they go off on their dungeon crawl. That's all the plot you're going to get from me. I don't do spoilers. If you want to read it, great. If not, that's fine. I imagine 90% of you that are watching this video have already read it. And you're just wondering what I got to say about it. And I say they're fucking awesome. They're great. I loved them as a kid. I reread them once in a while as an adult, you know. I mean, I think my reading tastes are different now. So I appreciate them for how much I loved them as a kid. And I will always cherish them, and they always just be magnificently beautiful little books in my collection. And I can't say enough about that. Sometimes that's what life is about the things that shaped you as a kid. And Dragonlance certainly shaped me as a kid, especially Dragons of Autumn Twilight. I think when I review Dragons of Winter Night and Dragons of Spring Dawning and these other ones, I will get a little bit more into some plot points and the characters and things like that. But for now, let's just suffice it to say that they're great little books illustrated by one of my friends, one of the best illustrators on the planet, Larry Elmore. So if you want to get Dragons of Autumn Twilight and read them to yourself or your kids, life-changing.